All right, today we're going to talk about angle relationships. So when we look at angle relationships, we're looking at different types of lines or segments or rays that intersect through a point, forming different types of angles. So in today's lesson, we're going to take a look at this idea where if we have angles, so remember, just a quick review, angles are made up of legs, at least two legs, and they meet at a vertex, right? So that forms an angle. If we say we have two angles, and let's say they share a vertex and a leg, so I'll call this this angle here. We'll call this angle A, and we have another one. We'll call this angle B. Notice here that these angles share a leg, this one in green. They share that middle leg, and they also share this vertex, or this point. If we take a look, we have angle A, which is in this part, and angle B, which is in this part. Okay. When we have angles that share a leg and a vertex, we call this adjacent angles. Okay. Adjacent angles just implies that, hey, they're going to be connected at a line or a leg and a point. That's it. So there are different types of adjacent angles we're going to learn about. The first one being, let's say that we have this familiar angle, right? This is called a right angle. And let's say I have a line or that goes through this, and I know it looks like it's perfect, but it isn't. Let's say this is, again, we'll call this C instead, just to make sure it's not the same as that, and we'll call this D. Okay. Now, this tells me that I have two angles, and I should draw these as lines. I have two angles, and they're connecting, so these are adjacent angles, but there's a special kind of angle, because these two angles add up to, so if I go angle C plus angle D, they add up to 90 degrees. And there's a special name for these. These are called complementary angles. What does it mean? It just means I have two angles, and sometimes it could be more, but at least two angles that add up to 90 degrees. We'll want to know this rule here because it's different from a right angle, okay? A right angle states we definitely equal 90 degrees, and that's it. That's the one angle. But these are two or more, so these are called complementary. Similarly, if we have a angle that looks like this, and I'm going to draw it going the other way for a change, and let's say we have this, we'll call this E, and we'll call this F. Well, notice if I look at these two angles, again, these are adjacent angles. They're sharing this leg. They're sharing that leg. Okay, but I have angle F, which is here, and I have angle E, which is here. Now, angle E, we can see it's an acute angle, and F is an obtuse angle. But this time, if I add these up, if I add angle E and I add angle F, what happens to this total angle, right? So I'm adding E, I'm adding F. If I add them together, what do I have? Well, I have 180 degrees. And often people think, oh, that's a straight angle. Well, it is kind of a straight angle. The straight angle is actually the other side of it, over here. But this, since we're adding two things together, this is called supplementary. So supplementary angles sum up or add up to 180. Sometimes it could be two angles, again, sometimes it can be many angles. So we want to know these angles and their angle relationships to them, okay? We're going to come across some other types of angles in the future, and, well, lines as well, and line segments, but there's one where if it crosses, let's say I have a line going across, I have another line going straight up and down. Well, when this happens, it creates a right angle, right? And actually, not just one right angle here, but actually four, right? 1, 2, 3, and 4. There's four of them. But this is what we call a perpendicular. Okay, a perpendicular angle. Okay, and it bisects or cuts through that line, sometimes called a perpendicular bisector, right? But it's cutting through the line in half, and it's creating a right angle. So perpendicular angles, perpendicular lines, I should say, perpendicular lines create a 90-degree angle, right? And all of these would be 90, 90, 90, 90. Okay. So recognize this will be important for us to understand. And then we'll have another final type of angle. In fact, these two are not angles by themselves, but later on we're going to have a bisector that cuts through these and create new kinds of angle relationships. But this one, these are what we call parallel. So perpendicular line versus a parallel line. A parallel line, these are lines that never touch. They'll never touch forever, right? We can think of like roads or streets that are kind of like that. So understand your angle relationships, how we have adjacent angles, complementary and supplementary, and then understand some of these other rules. In future classes and videos, I will show you how these relationships, along with the previous ones, right, the different types of angles, how they connect together to solve equations and solve real-world problems.